There is a chapter of human history so controversial, mainstream academics have spent the last 100 years trying to ignore it. We are taught that human civilization is the result of thousands of years of slow, painful trial and error. But buried deep beneath the sands of modern-day Iraq, there is a 5,000-year-old secret that proves that story is a lie. Consider the Sumerians. They are officially recognized as the first complex civilization on Earth. Seemingly overnight, they crawled out of the mud with advanced mathematics, the 60-second minute, written laws, and mapped constellations. But here is the detail historians conveniently leave out. If you translate their oldest records, the Sumerians refused to take credit for any of it. They didn't invent civilization. They explicitly stated it was handed down to them. A gift, or perhaps a curse, from beings who descended from the heavens. They called them the Anunnaki. Over the next 30 minutes, we are going to read the ancient texts that the academic world has tried to sweep under the rug. We are going to uncover a dark, forbidden history of unearthly genetic engineering. We will expose the brutal mutiny of the working-class gods known as the lgigi, and reveal the terrifying reason why the Anunnaki really came to this planet. They weren't benevolent teachers, they were miners, and they needed a biological machine to do the digging. The proof of this isn't a myth. It was physically dug out of the dirt in the mid-1800s. Deep in the ruins of the ancient city of Nineveh, archaeologists unearthed the library of Ashurbanipal. Over 30,000 cuneiform tablets were brought to the surface. For years, scholars thought nothing of them. They assumed they were just dusting off ancient tax records, grain receipts, and trade logs. But then, the code was cracked. The language was translated. And what those scholars read shook the very foundations of human history. These weren't tax logs. They were the highly detailed, chilling accounts of our creation and the terrifying entities who engineered us. So, erase everything you've been taught about human history. Today, we are taking a journey back to the very cradle of civilization to read the texts we were never meant to see. Strap in. Let the journey begin. If you want to find the exact moment human history broke, look at a place called Sumer. It was in the Middle East, in modern-day Iraq. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans barely changed. We lived in caves. We chased animals for food. Our greatest invention was tying a sharp rock to a stick. Then, about 6,000 years ago, something impossible happened. In the blink of an eye, the Sumerians stopped wandering. They built huge cities with tens of thousands of people. They built giant step pyramids called ziggurats. And they didn't just build, they invented a brand new math system based on the number 60. It is the exact same math we use today for a 60-second minute and a 60-minute hour. They mapped the stars. They invented the plow. They wrote the very first laws. Historians call this sudden explosion the Sumerian problem, because it simply makes no sense. It is like a toddler waking up one day and building a computer. Mainstream science says it was just a lucky leap in human brains. They say we just figured it all out on our own. But the Sumerians wrote everything down. And if you read their actual clay tablets, they tell a completely different story. The Sumerians never took credit for any of it. They wrote that all this knowledge, the math, the building, the farming, was handed down to them. They called these tools the me. They said these gifts came from powerful rulers who came down from the stars. The Sumerians clearly wrote that their knowledge was a gift. It was brought down to them by beings from the sky. But if civilization was a gift, Who gave it to us? And more importantly, why? To find the answer, we have to look at a terrifying translation of the old clay tablets. Because according to these ancient records, these gods didn't come to Earth to teach us. They came here out of pure desperation. They were trying to save their own dying world. And to do it, they needed something buried deep under our dirt. Something they were willing to kill for. To find out who these sky gods really were, we have to look at a man named Zecharia Sitchin. In the 1970s, he spent his life translating the oldest Sumerian clay tablets. Most regular historians ignore his work. They claim he translated the words wrong. But if you listen to his story, it actually makes a terrifying amount of sense. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki did not come from our solar system as we know it. They came from a giant, hidden planet called Nibiru. Unlike Earth, which travels around the sun in a neat circle, Nibiru had a massive, stretched-out path. It swung far out into cold, deep space before coming back to the inner solar system. Because of this dark, frozen journey, Nibiru was a harsh world. And according to the old texts, the Anunnaki were in terrible danger. Their planet's sky was failing. Deadly space radiation was leaking in, and their world was freezing. They were facing total extinction. They needed a way to fix their atmosphere, and their plan was brilliant. They figured out that if they crushed gold into a fine dust and floated it in their sky, it would act like a giant mirror. It would trap the heat inside and block the deadly radiation. But there was a huge problem. Nibiru was completely out of gold. They needed to find more. And as their planet swung close to the sun again, they found exactly what they needed. A blue planet filled with water and packed with huge, untouched veins of gold. Earth. About 450,000 years ago, long before the first cavemen, a team of Anunnaki landed on Earth. They were led by a brilliant alien scientist named Enki. You have to understand, these beings did not come here to be gods. They did not come to be worshipped. They came here to mine. Earth was just a giant, muddy, dangerous work zone to them. They started the slow, hard work of pulling gold out of the rivers and later digging deep underground in southern Africa. But mining gold is brutal, backbreaking work, and the Anunnaki leaders, the kings and queens of this alien race, were not going to swing pickaxes in the dark. They needed workers to do the heavy lifting. So the Anunnaki brought in a lower-class group of their own kind, called the lgigi. For thousands of years, these lesser gods were forced to dig in the hot, dark mines of Earth. They suffered in the heat, swinging pickaxes in the dirt so the Anunnaki kings could live comfortably above ground. But you can only push a slave so far before they break. What happened next almost wiped out the Anunnaki completely. It was a violent rebellion that stopped the gold mining dead in its tracks, and it forced the alien kings to make the darkest, most twisted decision in the history of the universe. Imagine working in a dark, hot cave for thousands of years, never seeing the sky, digging in the dirt while your bosses sit safely above ground. That was the life of the lgigi. They were the lower-class gods. They were the muscle. For 40 periods, which translates to tens of thousands of Earth years, they did the dirty work. The Sumerian texts describe their pain clearly. The tablets say, "The work was heavy, the distress was much." Finally, they couldn't take it anymore. The lgigi dropped their pickaxes. They threw their mining tools into the fire and burned them. They marched out of the mines and surrounded the house of the Anunnaki boss, a strict leader named Enlil. It was the first labor strike in the history of the universe. The lower gods were rebelling. They refused to dig another ounce of gold. The Anunnaki leaders panicked. Enlil wanted to punish the lgigi and force them back into the dirt. But Enki, the scientist, saw the truth. The workers were too tired. If they fought a war, the gold mining would stop completely. And if the gold stopped, their home planet would die. They were trapped. The lgigi would not work, but the gold had to be mined. They needed a brand new worker. They needed a creature smart enough to use tools and follow orders, but weak enough to never fight back. So Enki the scientist made a dark choice. He looked away from the rebellious gods, and he looked down at the wild, primitive apes walking around on Earth. He didn't just find a new worker, he decided to build one. And the ancient tablets tell us exactly how he did it. They describe a terrifying, unearthly medical procedure that proves one chilling fact. Human beings are not an accident. We are a science experiment. Look down at your own hands. Look at your skin, the way your fingers move, the way your mind is able to understand the words I am speaking right now. Mainstream science tells you that your body is the result of millions of years of random, natural accidents. But imagine for a second that it isn't. Imagine that your body, your brain, and your DNA were specifically designed in a laboratory by someone else. Designed not for a grand, beautiful purpose, but just to dig in the dirt. According to the Sumerian texts, that is exactly what happened. When the lower gods rebelled and refused to mine the gold, the alien scientist Enki was left with a massive problem. He needed a new worker. He walked the earth looking for a solution, and he found it wandering in the wild. At this time, Earth was home to early primitive hominids, creatures like Homo erectus. They were essentially wild animals. They walked on two legs, but they were covered in hair. They grunted, and they hunted with their bare hands. Enki looked at these wild creatures and realized something terrifying. The worker he needed was already here. It just needed an upgrade. In the ancient tablets, Enki goes to the chief medical officer, a female Anunnaki named Ninti. He tells her his dark plan. He says, "The creature whose name you have uttered, it exists. Bind upon it the image of the gods." What he was suggesting was completely unnatural. He wanted to take the genetics of the primitive Earth ape and splice it together with the advanced alien DNA of the Anunnaki themselves. The Sumerians described this process using the words they had. They talked about mixing the essence or the blood of a god with the clay of the earth. But when modern scholars and geneticists read those exact same texts today, they don't see mud and magic. They see a step-by-step description of in vitro fertilization. They see genetic engineering. Enki and Ninti created a laboratory. They took the egg of an Earth female, fertilized it with the genetic material of the Anunnaki, and implanted it into the wombs of Anunnaki women. There were many terrifying failures. The tablets describe early experiments resulting in creatures with deformed limbs, blind eyes, and broken minds. The aliens were playing God, making mistakes along the way. But finally, they got it right. They created a perfect biological machine. The Sumerians called this creature the Adamu, or the Lulu Amelu. Translated into English, it means the primitive worker. This new creature, the very first human being, was a masterpiece of dark science. It was smart enough to understand commands. It was strong enough to hold a pickaxe and mine the gold. But most importantly, it was stripped of the higher intelligence of the Anunnaki, so it would never question its masters. It would never rebel. If you think this is just a crazy myth, look at modern human genetics. To this day, scientists cannot explain the missing link. They cannot explain why human brain size suddenly exploded out of nowhere. Even stranger, humans have exactly 46 chromosomes. But all the other great apes on Earth, chimpanzees, gorillas, have 48. If we evolved from them, where did those 2 chromosomes go? Modern science shows that our second chromosome was actually fused together. 2 separate pieces of DNA were somehow spliced into one, hiding the genetic code. Was it a random accident of nature? Or was it the genetic signature of Enki editing our code? At first, the plan worked perfectly. The Adamu went into the mines. The gold started flowing again. The Anunnaki kings were happy. But Enki made one massive miscalculation. He eventually gave these human workers the ability to reproduce, and we started breeding. We multiplied rapidly. We spread out of the mines and across the land. We became loud. We became unpredictable. And the strict Anunnaki boss, Enlil, began to look at humans not as a helpful tool, but as a dangerous infestation. An infestation he decided to wipe off the face of the earth entirely. Imagine being a scientist who creates a colony of ants in a glass box. At first, you control them, you feed them, you watch them dig exactly where you want them to dig. But then they start breeding. They multiply completely out of control. They start crawling out of the box. They cover your floor. They cover your walls. Suddenly, they aren't your interesting science experiment anymore. They are a pest. This is exactly how the Anunnaki leadership began to view humanity. The human experiment worked way too well. We were designed to be primitive workers, but Enki, the scientist who built us, had given us the ability to reproduce. And reproduce we did. Humans spread rapidly out of the mining camps. We filled the valleys and the plains. The Sumerian texts are chillingly clear about what happened next. The tablets say that the noise of humanity became too loud. We were unpredictable. We were wild. Enlil, the strict commander of the Anunnaki, was disgusted by us. He didn't see humans as living beings with souls. He saw us as defective, noisy farm equipment. Enlil called a council of the alien gods. He demanded a permanent solution to the human problem. He didn't just want to reduce our numbers. He wanted total, global eradication. And the universe gave him the perfect weapon. According to the texts, Nibiru, their massive home planet, was swinging back through our solar system. Its massive gravitational pull was dragging on the Earth. The ice caps were shifting. A cataclysmic global flood was already building naturally. All the Anunnaki had to do was let it happen. Enlil forced every single god in the council to take a blood oath. They swore they would not warn the humans. They would simply pack into their skyships, launch into Earth's orbit, and watch the primitive workers drown. But Enki, the scientist who created us, could not let his masterpiece die. He was bound by the oath, so he couldn't speak the warning directly to a human face. Instead, the tablets say he went to the reed hut of a human named Ziusudra, a man you might know from later religions as Noah. Enki stood outside the hut and pretended to talk to the wall. He whispered the blueprints for a massive submersible ship. He told the human to quickly gather the seeds of life, hide his family inside, and seal the heavy doors. Because the gods were leaving, and the sky was about to break. The Sumerian description of the Great Flood is absolutely terrifying. This wasn't just heavy rain, it was a planetary wipeout. The tablets say the sky turned completely black. Violent winds tore the land apart. Massive walls of water, miles high, swallowed the cities, the mines, and the tallest mountains. Everything humanity had built was scrubbed from the face of the earth in a matter of hours. The destruction was so violent, so absolute, that even the Anunnaki themselves were terrified by what they had let happen. The texts describe the alien gods sitting in their spacecrafts, safely orbiting above the earth. They looked down at the swirling brown water covering the entire globe, and for the first time, the gods wept. They realized they had made a massive, deadly mistake. Yes, the noisy humans were dead, but so was everything else. Who was going to harvest the food? Who was going to mine the gold? The gods had just wiped out their own slave class, and now they were going to starve. When the waters finally went down and Ziusudra's sealed ship landed safely on the mud, the Anunnaki descended from the sky. They found the human survivors, but instead of punishing them, the gods were thrilled. They were so relieved to have their workers back, they promised never to wipe us out again. But things had to change. The Anunnaki didn't want to manage the humans directly anymore, so they created a new system. They chose a few select humans to act as middlemen. They called them kings. These human kings were given the divine right to rule over the rest of us, taking their orders directly from the sky gods. For thousands of years, humans and gods lived in this new, uneasy system. We built massive temples for them. We brought them food. We bowed to them. But then, something unexplainable happened. Right at the peak of human civilization, right when we were building global empires, the Anunnaki simply vanished. They left no forwarding address. They abandoned their massive temples. They completely disappeared from the historical record. Where did they go? Did they finally pack up and return to Nibiru? Did they die off? Or is the truth far, far darker? What if our creators never actually left at all? For thousands of years, humans and gods lived side by side. We built their temples. We farmed their food. We dug their gold. But if you look at the historical timeline, something strange happens around the end of the Bronze Age. The physical gods vanished. They stopped walking among us. They stopped giving direct orders. They completely disappeared from the ancient texts. Instead of living in temples right down the street, the concept of God suddenly moved up into the sky, into heaven, invisible, untouchable. Mainstream historians say this is just human religion naturally evolving. We stopped believing in physical aliens and started believing in spiritual beings. But what if we didn't? What if they never left at all? Think back to the deal the Anunnaki made after the Great Flood. They didn't want to manage us directly anymore, so they appointed human kings to rule over us. But they didn't pick just anyone. The Sumerian texts say the right to rule was dropped down from heaven. It was in the blood. The kings were given Anunnaki DNA. Look at the world today. Thousands of years later, humanity is still ruled by a tiny elite fraction of the population. We still dig the gold. We still do the heavy lifting. And the people at the very top of the pyramid still claim they are born into power. They still protect their bloodlines. Did the Anunnaki really go back to Nibiru? Or did they just figure out that the easiest way to control a prison is to make the prisoners think they are free? Perhaps our creators are still right here, hiding in plain sight, pulling the strings of the global elite. But there is one final, terrifying piece to this puzzle. When the Anunnaki vanished, human history didn't get peaceful. It got much darker. The new gods that popped up across the ancient world didn't ask for gold anymore. They asked for blood. In the lands of Canaan, and later the massive empire of Carthage, the people didn't worship Enki or Enlil. They worshipped a different entity, a god named Baal. And Baal didn't want humans to just dig in the dirt. He demanded the ultimate sacrifice. He wanted their children. If you want to know what happened to the ancient world after the Anunnaki stepped into the shadows, and you want to uncover the forbidden, bloody rituals of the Carthaginian Empire, click the video on your screen right now. The truth about Baal is waiting for you. I will see you there.